You're listening to the Mind Flipping Podcast, where you'll find tools and tips to help you renovate and update your mind and life.
Richard, thanks so much for being on the Mind Flipping Podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I love having guests like you. Listeners recognize there's always common themes, and I'll often start out my interview, conversation, podcast with that excitement of, you're the kind of guest I love to have because you have a lot of mind-flipping stories, don't you?
More than a few, yeah. The problem is selecting them.
So for new listeners, as you tell the stories, they'll understand clearly what mind-flipping is, but basically it's our ability to renovate and update our minds, our lives, our thoughts. And you and I, as I told our listeners in the intro, met through some hypnosis training, actually hypnosis instructor certification, I guess you'd say. Yeah.
This was the Master Trainer Series.
Yeah. And so we can certify other hypnotists, and got to know you a little bit, heard some of your story, and in prep for this conversation, I hear even more mind-flipping stories. So among the things that I know about you are that you've had a number of awesome careers. Mm-hmm. And do you want to just talk about your different careers? So maybe your professional flips, and then some very personal ones.
Sure. I'm a retired Air Force officer. Went into the Air Force straight from college.
Thank you again. Thank you for your service.
Entirely my pleasure. I thank the taxpayers when I stand at the mailbox the first of every month.
Well deserved.
Yeah. Well, I spent 20 years and 3 days, and my fields were nuclear weapons, and then later nuclear policy and procedure, command and control, and intelligence. So during that time, the Air Force made me get an MBA. When I retired, I figured I might as well use it. So I worked as a logistics executive for a number of years. And Rick, I hated every single day of it. Because
so what is that, a logistics executive?
Well, I was number 3 in a regional distribution center for a large retail store, whom I won't name.
Sure.
But they have a dot in a circle. My job was to figure out how I was going to get 10,000 more boxes through a saturated sorting system every shift.
Yeah.
Who cares? I mean, if a case of Tide doesn't wind up on a shelf in Lubbock, Texas tomorrow, no one's going to die. So I got with the people and said, look, here's the deal. You guys know and love boxes. I love people. You handle the boxes, I'll take care of you. And so that was great. We were very successful. So they were looking for somebody to be a project manager when they were building a new facility here in Michigan, my home state where I grew up. So I volunteered and came here, and we got it up and running. And the day we cut the ribbon, I left and went back to school to do what I've always wanted to do, and that's become a therapist.
Fantastic.
So, and that's where I'm at now.
So I'm thinking about your path. It's like an Oreo cookie. You know, the crispy and crunchy Army service, that soft, mushy box logistics.
I would say the other way around. I love the military service because, I mean, it was dealing with people.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like really important things, you know, in the Army, really important things as a therapist, and the boring stuff in the middle.
Yeah, well, yeah. But, you know, there are people who eat and breathe and live logistics. And, you know, every time we walk into a store, you know, thank goodness they're there, because that's what makes everything run. But it's just, but everybody's not cut out for everything, and I certainly wasn't cut out for that.
So you went back to school to become a therapist, and
yes, and then inherited a practice. I live in Kalamazoo, and I inherited a practice in Detroit. It was just given to me, which is a 2-hour drive. So for a number of years, about 3 years, I was driving back and forth several times a week to the office to see clients. And then one Sunday, my wife walks into the living room with a newspaper with a big red circle around it and says, "You will apply for this job." And it was clinical director at a juvenile detention center. And I said, I have absolutely no idea about child psychology in any way, shape, or form. I've got 2 kids and I screwed them up. So actually they're very fantastic people.
I'm sure.
But no, it's at least an hour closer. You will apply for this job. And I did, and be careful what you ask for, because that was 13 years ago. And within 6 months, I knew I could not possibly do anything else. The working with kids and just making a difference in their lives was just so incredibly invigorating and just uplifting that I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And then, so I get to work with kids, and I get to be a clinician and an administrator at the center. I'm executive director. And then in the evenings, I get to come to my own practice and pursue my other passion. And that's mental health therapy, and as a cognitive behavioral therapist. And I use cognitive behavioral hypnosis as my primary intervention with my clients. Not with everyone, but when it's indicated, I use hypnosis with them.
So what's the difference between regular cognitive behavioral therapy and when you throw hypnosis in?
Well, hypnosis is a more directive, and as you know, it's a more highly focused state of attention. We're dealing with one particular issue, and usually I'm dealing with a particular set of symptoms that are bothering the client. So that's the presenting issue. And as I'm sure you know, a lot of times a client comes in and goes, here's my presenting issue. And what they're telling you is, here are my symptoms. And you have to go, okay, but I can help you with those, but here's what really the issue is. So cognitive behavioral, the cognitive part is we're going in trying to change the person's dysfunctional thinking. We believe that as you think, so you feel, and as you feel, so you behave. So if you want to change behaviors, the fastest way to do that is to change the thinking behind that. And so both of us, both schools share that. And then it's when you bring in hypnosis into the mix, then again, it's very time-focused, very solution and issue-focused. Whereas during talk therapy, you can, you go where the client wants to go.
So more focused, probably quicker flips, turnarounds, results.
Oh, absolutely. I can get results. I mean, permanent, dramatic results in 3 sessions with hypnotherapy. That would take months with talk therapy. In every case where it's even remotely feasible, I try it at least.
So when and how did hypnosis come into your practice?
Well, it was always in my practice. How it came into my life is a completely different story.
Let's go there then.
All right. Well, that was 45 years ago. I was helping my grandmother clean out an old bedroom that had become a storage room. And I reached under the bed and pulled out this dusty old box and opened it up, and it was full of albums. LPs. And this was so long ago that they were 78 RPMs. And it was Dave Ellman Teaches Medical Hypnosis.
Wow.
And I'm 15 and I'm looking at this going, oh man, I've hit the mother lode. Grandma, what are these? And she goes, oh, I think I got that in an estate sale years ago. You want them? Yes. So they were mine. And that was it. The horse was off and running from there.
That is a great story. I never heard that.
So I was bothering all my family and friends and all of that. So now what I need to say too is, I was bothering my family and friends because I was comfortable with them, but I also had a very bad case of social anxiety disorder. I mean, I was pathologically shy. And so fast forward 3 years later, I'm at school. I'm a research associate in a psych lab, and they needed a hypnotist. They wanted to use hypnosis as a variable in one of the studies, and the person they had lined up had to leave school that semester. So they needed somebody to learn hypnosis, and there just happened to be a hypnosis training course in Detroit that weekend. I was at Michigan State at the time, in East Lansing. So the director goes, Dama, you're the new guy, you go. Okay, sure, no problem. You had never turned down education. So off I went to Detroit and walked in. It was a Renaissance Center, and there must have been like 300-400 people there.
Wow.
And which is, that's perfect for an introvert, social anxiety disorder. So I pretended I was a mushroom and signed in, and then walked into the main conference room. And again, it was like an aircraft hangar. And looking back in the corner where the introverts are, that's where they're my tribe, so we know each other. So we were hanging out back there. And everything was cool until, and it was one of those training scenarios. So you meet Friday night, you get some housekeeping out of the way, and you get the book work done. And then the next day they start, the instructor will explain a technique, then ask for a volunteer, demonstrate it, and then you break off into groups and all that. So everything was going along great until Saturday after lunch, when he starts talking about social anxiety and is walking directly to the back of the room. Now I'm thinking to myself, there are probably 399 other people in this room. There is no way in God's green earth that he's coming to, and he puts his hand on my shoulder and says, like this young man who's about 2 breaths away from a heart attack. Aren't you, kid? Uh-huh. And so, but he leaned over, and we had name tags on, and he just said, Rich, just close your eyes and listen to my voice. That's all you need to do, is just listen to my voice. It's just you and I. There's no one else in the room any other noise just goes in one ear and out the other. So I'm going to take you by the elbow and lead you up to the front of the room. Keep your eyes closed. You're going to sit in the chair that you've seen a dozen other people sit in. No one's died. And I'm just going to talk, and you're going to listen. And if I ask you to think of a blue bunny, can you think of a blue bunny? Yes, I can do that. Okay, let's go. And he brought me up and sat me down, and he started talking to me. And 45 years later, I still do not have firsthand recollection of what happened in that 20 minutes. But when I opened my eyes, I'm looking at all these people, laughing and smiling and clapping. And I'm like, wow, that is really weird. Huh? And I couldn't put my finger on it. The instructor goes, you're uncomfortable because you're not uncomfortable. That's it. And I am not making it. Well, you've met and you've heard my jokes. Within a month, I was doing stand-up comedy. I went from social anxiety disorder so bad that I would drop a class if I had to do a presentation, to doing stand-up comedy and presentations and I guest lectures. So it put me in front of an audience and I come alive. So I'm a ham.
That is an awesome mind flipping story.
But yeah, so that's why I also knew that if I ever became a therapist, which was my dream, that hypnosis would play a very integral part in that, because it made such an incredible, dramatic difference in my life.
So when did you know or think about being a therapist? Do you remember the earliest recollections?
I went when I was getting ready to graduate from high school. My parents said, you can go into the trades, you can go to college. I already had a year done by then. And they said, I want to go to school, of course. And they said, what do you want to study? And I said, well, I want to study psychology. I'd like to be a therapist. And only crazy people are therapists. No, you cannot. No, we will not pay for that. Do something. So my brother was a cop. I love criminal justice. I love the law. So I went and got a criminal justice degree. And I used it for about what it was good for at the time. And I joined the military.
There you go.
And never looked back. It was a wonderful, never used the criminal justice in the military, but I'm sure glad I have it now.
So my curiosity is going back to your 15 years old, and you find the Elman albums.
Right.
And so the seed was there already.
Oh, right.
A lot of other teens would have looked and not even noticed, and you were excited. Do you remember even earlier being excited about psychology, the way our mind works, this field?
Oh, absolutely. Growing up, I was just always fascinated by ghost stories, and although it gets a bad name, back then it was referred to as the occult. Now I guess it would be a lot of new age things, but I've always fascinated me. And as a believer or non-believer, there were a lot of people who believed this, and like, well, what's in it? And so that's when I started looking at religions and philosophy and metaphysics. That's the word I'm looking for, metaphysics. And so when hypnosis presented itself, it was something that I was familiar with, and it was just a natural progression. And then when I started really go, well, this is so powerful, but why does it work? And when I started doing research into the science behind it, that's when the science geek in me got triggered. And then ever since then, that again, it's been a passion.
And so I hear that common thread of curiosity, that you were always curious, so like trying to put the puzzle pieces together between the metaphysical, the way our mind works, research.
Yeah, still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
What's it all about? Nearest I can figure, it's just about living.
Yeah. So I do want to hear if you have any professional mind flipping stories, your time dealing with juveniles. Are there any either common techniques, stories, tools that you share that seem to work universally, or similarly, are there any common mind flips, because you've seen great results? People from all over the world are coming to study your juvenile justice center there, or juvenile, what do you call it?
Juvenile Detention and Treatment Center. Juvenile Detention and Treatment Center.
Things that you see that, boy, if more people knew this.
That begs a lot of different answers. People say, what do you think the biggest problem is? And I say most of these kids, the biggest problem is these kids suffer from a no deficiency. There is not a responsible adult in their lives willing to set reasonable boundaries and enforce them. And so they wind up running the house. And so, when the inmates run the asylum, there's usually problems. But when they get to our center, the very first thing we do is after intake, we sit them down. We give them all the program materials and we say, here are the rules. Here are the consequences for violating the rules. And we hold everyone to the same standard. The rules apply to me exactly the same way they apply to you. And so you set firm, fair, and consistent boundaries and enforce them, and these kids flourish. And then we get them to, again, we're cognitive behavioral. So you can tell by someone's behavior, especially when they're emotionally dysregulated and they're getting, really spun up. It's a wonderful opportunity to say, look, Pete, I see you're getting really upset. What are you thinking? What's going on? What's driving this? Let's find out, because this is what got you here in the first place. So what are you thinking? All right. And what triggered that? So how else can we look at this? And then hopefully you get them to start catching themselves when they're doing that. And when you see a kid catch himself the first time and the light comes on, it makes it all worthwhile.
That's awesome. Yeah,
that's our basic shtick, and it's a lot more complicated than that. And the consequences, and we consequence positively and negatively. That's the behavioralist part, Skinnerian psychology.
Okay.
So behaviors that receive rewards, positive reinforcements, will increase. Behaviors that receive negative consequences tend to decrease, and behaviors that receive no action at all self-extinguish. So we make it a point to catch the kids doing something right 4 times for every time we criticize them. And the consequences, if you break a major rule, the staff will go, you have earned a 5-minute timeout. Now you have to go to a corner or a neutral wall and stand there facing it with your hands by your sides quietly for 5 minutes. At the end of that, you come back, report to the staff what behavior you were engaging in that got you that 5-minute timeout. You report back and the staff goes, okay, great. And everything's, you get back in the program and press on. If you refuse the timeout, now you've got a 30 and 5. You have to go to a secure hallway and sit in a chair for a half hour. And this is not punishment. This is reflection time. Because again, you have earned this consequence by your behaviors. We are now giving you the time to think about what you were doing and what you were thinking that earned you this consequence. So then they have to do a 30-minute, and then they come out and do the 5. And if there's ever violence or threats of violence, then it's a 30, 30, and 5. And so it's like an hour and 5 minutes before they're back in program. And we go to great lengths not to lay hands on. That is the absolute last resort in all circumstance, because I don't want my people to get hurt, and I certainly don't want kids to get hurt. And thank God we've never had either of those happen in the last decade.
Fantastic.
So hope that answers your question.
It does. It's kind of what I thought, that they're actually it was better than I thought. So you gave some great framework and direction. But it is a case by case,
Sure.
Every child, every heart, every mind, every life, there's a little different twist to
We're
it.
starting to see a disturbing trend in that we're the mental health provider of last resort. We're starting to see kids getting placed in the center because they have definitely, they are at least accused of having committed a serious offense. But the underlying cause of that is mental health. It's not criminal thinking. And so that's what now we're seeing, but there's just simply no other place to put these kids. And so they have, at least for temporarily, they come to the juvenile center.
What a blessing for them.
In many cases, yes, it is. And hopefully we plant the seeds that'll grow. And that's on our detention side. And we do have a longer term residential treatment facility also on campus.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. I do want you to share some of your other personal mind flipping stories related to, near death experiences, coming back from life.
Oh yeah. I'm a pro at that.
Tell us about that.
Well, let me see. December in 2009, it was October of 2013. I had prostate cancer, and I went in for, to have it removed, and the surgeon used a robot-assisted device, and one of the arms in the robot compromised 2 blood vessels in my abdomen, and there wasn't a camera on that arm, so they didn't know about it.
Wow.
And so the entire purpose of that arm was to place a drain line. So the drain was actually stemming the flow of blood from those 2 blood vessels. It was acting kind of like a leaky cork. So a couple hours after I'd awakened, the nurses come in and say, okay, you need to get up and take some, at least take a few steps. So as soon as they stood me up, I bled out. And there happened to be a trauma nurse who wasn't supposed to be there, but took charge, and they pumped me full of fluids and rushed me back into surgery. And he found one, but not the, and oh yes, by the way, I went into full cardiac arrest and had a full code during that.
Holy cow.
I remember waking up going, wow, this isn't good. There's an awful lot of really concerned looking people here. And then I remember going out again and waking up in ICU. He found one, but not the other. And closed me up. And then, so another 10 hours later, I had bled out again and coded, and they brought me back, and the chief of trauma surgery took over and opened me up from stem to stern. And I was told that I coded again on the table.
Wow.
And then, 3 years later, I had a hip replaced and coded twice during that for absolutely no reason anybody can figure out. And the scar that the trauma surgeon gave me, saving my life, herniated. So they had to go in and redo that. And while he was in front of his eyes, my bowel perforated. Just. And he goes, oh, well, as long as we're here, let's fix that. But yeah, that was a bad that was a bad situation also. So yeah, I've been back and forth a few times. And
did I hear 5?
Well, yeah, this is my 6th time back. All right.
Wow.
So
I've got to ask if you remember.
oh yes,
Any?
I had a number of experiences, and yeah, I believe that I was allowed to come back because I agreed to take a new mission, something else that I needed to accomplish. Evidently, what I had come here to do the first time had been accomplished. And you have to understand, I wasn't really much of a believer in these things. I mean, I had studied, metaphysics and the occult and all of that, but my general opinion was, yeah, it's nice to it's nice to think so. But I don't see any compelling physical evidence that would lead me in that direction. Well, there's nothing like being there yourself.
I can't imagine. And so do you have specific recollections or memories, or is it more of a sense and feeling?
Oh yeah. The first one where I agreed to come back is private. I would rather not go into that one.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there was actually this last time was just an incredible sense of freedom, of connectedness, of just knowing where every particle in the universe was, and it was exactly where it was supposed to be. You just knew that. And it was just knowing without thinking. And the reason there, so entire libraries have been written about what is enlightenment or what is the experience, is because we as human beings simply do not have words to describe these things, these feelings and these experiences. That's just so far beyond the normal human experience. But it just an incredible sense of love. And then there was a presence that said, you've done so much, but now you have another decision to make. You can stay here or you can go back. But if you go back, this is what you have to do. That, oh, put me back in, coach. There's people depend on me, and I'm not done yet. There's just too much left to do.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful story, and the little bit that I know you is, I can tell that you live like there's an excitement, there's passion, there's a lot to do.
Rick, the one thing, you don't know when it's going to be over. In the blink of an eye, you've got to live like every breath is your last. And the thing is, when I'm awake, and really paying attention to what's going on in life, is, okay, I've got this gift. I'm breathing. I'm here. What am I doing with it? What can I do to make this better?
Those are inspiring words. That, what you just said, and the story. Our regular listeners will perhaps recall previous podcast guest, Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan, had a mystical out-of-body, near-death type experience from a meditation. And she described it similarly, where she said, there are no words, but I'll do my best. Let me try. And she talked about bursting into 1,000 particles and recognizing everyone was in a perfect place.
Absolutely.
It was all love.
Yes, I can see that.
No questions, all answers.
Yeah, and peace, just peace. And then there is that presence. It's just, for me, I perceived it as a feminine presence, but it's just, if there was a God when I was growing up, it always made sense to me that it would be a woman, this creation and all of that. It didn't make sense. Anyways, that's personal. Let's move on, because I'm sure you're going to get mail about this.
Oh, please do. Bring on the mail. Bring on. That's all wonderful. I appreciate. I'm so grateful that you shared all of that.
Well, thank you.
That's wonderful. Cool. So, well, there it is. The sound of spackling. Sometimes I don't know when or how it'll come in. It's usually good timing, and it was there. So, are you ready, Richard, for the spackle round?
Let me take a quick drink.
Take your time, and I'll spin the spackle round wheel.
By the way, I don't drink. So yes. Okay. So spin the spackle round, and we are where?
Yes. So let's see. The first question that came up. Oh, so this is interesting. This question hasn't come up in a while, and the spackle round and the spackle wheel is so intuitive. It's incredible. So
There's no
the
such thing as
question,
coincidences, you know.
yes, exactly. The spackle round question is, and maybe it has to do with your work in the juvenile treatment and detention center. Did I have that right?
Up the other way around, but yeah, just the juvenile center. That's good. The
JV.
The Jew Center.
Is the question is, what's love got to do with it?
Oh, love is the answer. I mean, it's the question and the answer. It's what it is. And love for self, respect for self, and your place in the community. That's what we're teaching you. You do not exist as an island. You are part of a community. There are people who depend on you. You depend on others. We are all interdependent. So.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you. Another speckle round question. Is there a word or phrase of the day that you'd like to share?
Oh, wow. This really is coincidence, but no such thing. One of my posts this morning, I dusted one off, and I blogged for years, and I'm an author, and so I've got thousands and thousands of posts over the years. This one is still my favorite. It's a picture and quote by Anthony Hopkins, and it says, my philosophy is, it's none of my business what people say or think about me. I am who I am, and I do what I do. I expect nothing and accept everything, and it has made life so much easier. And when that's it, when you radical acceptance, even when it sucks, if you just go, that's the way it is, it's not going to be this way forever. I'm tougher than this, and it passes.
So you have that was really good. That was kind of a long quote. Was that all him?
Yep, that was all him.
And so you
can go to my Facebook page today and see it.
Okay, excellent. And if somebody's trying to find you on Facebook?
It's Richard Dama, D-A-M-A, LPC, as in licensed professional counselor. If you type that in, I'm sure I'll come up. But it's also counseling and clinical hypnotherapy.
Excellent. And so as you're talking, I've got a similar quote from him. I thought I had it on my phone. It wasn't that long, but it was, the core of it, which is, what anybody thinks of me is none of my business. It doesn't matter.
And that's an aha moment when I can get that through to my clients too, is what difference does it make what somebody thinks of you? You have no control over their mind. So why are you concerned with that? If they like you, great, they'll hang out with you. If they don't, there are other people around.
Right.
Sometimes it sucks if you lose pardon me. It's uncomfortable or disappointing if you would prefer to have somebody and they wouldn't prefer not to, but that's part of life. That builds character. It's just, I think that's what makes the game of life fun. Yeah. You got to expect to get banged up and disappointed every now and then. That's part of the fun.
The variety, the ups and downs, the tripping and getting back up.
And if it was all sugar and pillows, we wouldn't appreciate it. You got to get a couple of bruises and skin your knuckles every now and then.
Yeah, from knee to hip, whatever it takes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, stay off the skates if you're my age.
Richard was sharing.
I went skating this weekend for the first time in ages, and I took a fall, and my right hip is bruised from my butt to my knee and from thigh to hamstring. So yeah, it's ugly.
And it makes you appreciate it.
Out there this weekend.
You're going back out this weekend?
Heck yes, absolutely. No, I'm not. I'm going to get back up on that horse and ride, dude.
Like your spirit. That's right. All right. Let's spin. We'll do one more spackle round question here. Uh-huh. Oh, it's kind of hopping between the two. So we're going to ask two questions here.
Question. I'm going to get a twofer.
You get a twofer. That's right. So the first one, regular listeners will recognize when time allows and when the conversation heads towards it, or when the spackle wheel lands on it, we try to remind our listeners that despite the fact that our guests are high performers on so many levels, they still struggle. Do you have a current or recent struggle that you'd be willing to share with our listeners?
Yeah, actually, and we were chatting about this before we went online. Actually, a different story just came to mind, and it's very personal. I was online, and somebody that I really, really thought of as a family, a very close friend, almost one of my best friends, made a really snarky comment, and which is on my public site, and I kind of jokingly called them on it, and they doubled down on it, and just like, okay, and I mean that I was devastated. That really hurt, and it was a couple of days where I was alternating between breathing to not really get angry and just feeling incredibly hurt and devastated. And then I realized it's time for you to start following your own medicine. You have absolutely no control over what other people think. Yes, that's disappointing, and yes, that hurts, but there's nothing you can do about it except move on. And so yeah, that was a mind flipping thing. There is when, physician heal thyself. You have to go through that. But again, it was as the director, I have a clinical staff working for me, and my de facto assistant director is my clinical director, and we have coffee usually every morning, and we chat. And she and one of the other clinicians just kind of said, you need to get your head screwed on straight. What's happening? And try not to bring personal into the business setting, but we're friends, and just kind of, without getting into details, it was just, but they said, no, you need to get your head on straight. There's nothing you can do about what other people think. It's just, now, what do you think, and what are you going to do about it? So, having those friends and those colleagues who are professionals, give you back your own medicine is sometimes humbling, but it's also therapeutic.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Great reminder that it happens to all of us, especially as you described, those close to us can really knock us off kilter.
That was the thing, I think, really. It was just such a sucker punch. I never saw it coming. If it was probably anybody else in the world, it wouldn't have affected me like that, but I just never saw it coming. And I still don't know if it was intentional or if I just was oversensitive and took it the wrong way. I haven't had the opportunity to address it with the person yet.
Yeah.
And it's not something I want to do on the phone. I want to be there, look them in the eye when I have that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know we can all relate. All right. So the spackle round wheel was hopping between two, and here was the other one, very similar, a little bit more, kind of going back in the past a little bit. If you're willing to share the most difficult part of your life, what's been the most difficult part? And then similarly, what did that do for you?
Oh man. There have been so many. I would have to say, after my most recent NDE, near-death experience, there was a crushing major depressive episode after that.
Wow.
Just crushing. I did not know that you could possibly get that low, feel that low. It gave me an entirely new perspective on my clients and my clients' lives. And as a professional, as a therapist, I knew what was happening, and there wasn't a darn thing I could do about it. You can pep talk yourself all day, but and a chemical imbalance to be sure, and we were getting that addressed at the time. But dying is one of those life-changing events. By definition, you cannot possibly be the same after that. And that forced me to really reevaluate my entire life. What have I done? What could I have done that I haven't? And where are my priorities? And so, yeah, it just led to one thing after another. Now, luckily, And all this is while I was healing from, the abdominal scars and the bowel resectioning. So I was on my back for a couple of months. Luckily, my family was very, very supportive, always very supportive. But my colleagues also were very supportive. And, again, they rallied around me and said, what can we do to help? What's going on? And sometimes we would just sit and not even talk, just presence. But yeah, the having and knowing that my colleagues cared enough to take time out of their busy lives and busy schedules, and had enough respect for me as an individual, and I hope as a professional, to give back and to help me. And I will never forget that, and I am indebted to every one of them. But yeah, that was a huge turning point in my life. And now compassion is really comes a lot easier because I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end.
Wow. Well, I want to acknowledge you for sharing that now and for sharing it then. As a professional in the field, you wouldn't be the first who didn't reach out for help, yet you did.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, actually, the healthiest therapists I know have their own therapists. And I have people that I speak to, and I am a person that several other people speak to. And, not on a formal basis, but just case conceptualization, or, hey, I'm running up against this and I'm thinking of going this direction, or just, I am personally struggling with this. You got a minute to talk? It's incredibly powerful. And it's nice to be able to give that back too.
Yeah. Dr. Chan had a similar, I don't know if she used the word depression. She may have, after her mystical experience, that it was hard to put it all together. And I think she said it took a couple of years where she went from that bliss of that experience to where she realized she's got to be the bridge between that and this everyday existence.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is, that's wonderful. It's a wonderful goal, a wonderful mission. I applaud her in that.
But to like your story, it took a while, and there was
well, my research has indicated that major depressions are not unusual after NDEs, because again, and just what you mentioned, that bliss, that love, that happiness, that presence, that all-consuming, and it, looking back at it rationally, it could have just been oxygen deprivation of the brain, but it was just so incredible. And then to come back into physical form and to fall in line with the rest of the rats in the maze, is really disheartening. It can be, but it's also a fabulous opportunity if you get your head put on right.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have, and I'm so grateful that we met and that you're here. Thank you for taking the time today to share all those stories. Some very personal experiences as the sirens go by.
It was my pleasure, Rick. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, I want you to know that I love you and I appreciate you.
Right back at you, bro.
Thank you.